He looked her dead in the eye, flicked a crumpled $5 bill onto the white tablecloth, and said, "Maybe if you smile more, you'll actually make something of yourself, sweetheart." He thought he was the king of the world because he wore a $3,000 suit and ordered the most expensive wine on the menu. He thought she was just a clumsy waitress struggling to pay rent. What he didn't know was that the very chair he was sitting in, the marble floors beneath his Italian loafers, and the entire 40-story skyscraper towering above them, belonged to her. And that $5 tip it was about to cost him his entire empire. The rain in Chicago has a way of sounding like loose change hitting the pavement, a relentless metallic rhythm that you only really notice when you're broke. Or in Flora Bennett's case, when you're pretending to be. If you Googled Flora Bennett, you wouldn't find much. You might see a grainy photo of her father Elias Bennett, the real estate mogul who reshaped the skyline of the Midwest in the 90s. You might see the obituary that ran in the Tribune 6 months ago. But you wouldn't see her face plastered on Forbes covers or social media. Her father had taught her the most valuable lesson of the wealthy true power is invisible. That night, however, she wasn't the CEO of Bennett Holdings. She was just Flora, wearing an apron that smelled faintly of stale espresso and lemon degreaser, trying to keep Table 4 from rioting. "Flora, I need a runner for the scallops on 6, and Table 12 is asking for a refill on the sparkling." The shout came from David, the floor manager of the Gilded Fork. David was a good man, roughly 50, with a hairline that was receding faster than the polar ice caps. He was currently sweating through his shirt. He had no idea that Flora signed his paycheck. To him, she was the new hire, a favor asked by an old family friend to cover the holiday rush because 3 servers had quit in the same week. "On it, David," she yelled back, balancing a tray of appetizers. Why was she doing this? It wasn't an episode of Undercover Boss. She wasn't looking for a tax write-off or a PR stunt. She was there because her father had bought this building, the Bennett Tower, 30 years ago. The Gilded Fork was his favorite restaurant. He used to sit in the corner booth, the one with the velvet privacy curtain, and drink black coffee while he negotiated deals that changed the city's zoning laws. Since he passed, the restaurant's numbers had been tanking. The food was good, the location was prime, but something was rotting from the inside. Flora wanted to see it from the ground floor. She wanted to know if they should save it or evict the tenants and turn it into a high-end gym. So for the last 3 weeks, she had been scrubbing tables, taking insult, and aching in places she didn't know existed. Her feet were throbbing in cheap, non-slip shoes. Her lower back felt like it was being compressed by a hydraulic press. She dropped the scallops at table 6, a nice older couple celebrating an anniversary. The husband smiled at her. "Thank you, dear. You look exhausted." "Just the dinner rush," she smiled, wiping a bead of sweat from her temple. "Can I get you anything else?" "We're fine," the wife said kindly. Flora retreated to the service station to chug a glass of lukewarm water. The chaos of a Friday night dinner service is a specific kind of hell. The kitchen is a war zone of shouting chefs and clattering pans. The dining room is a theater where you have to pretend everything is serene. The space between is where the servers live in the panic. "You holding up, rookie?" Flora looked up. It was Chloe, a 22-year-old student working her way through law school. She was tough, cynical, and currently the best waitress on the floor. "Barely," Flora admitted. "My feet are killing me." "You get used to the numbness," Chloe said, checking her makeup in the reflection of the coffee machine. "Just don't let the suits get to you. It's Friday night. The wolves are out." "Wolves?" "Investment bankers, hedge fund guys, the ones who work in the offices upstairs," Chloe said, pointing a thumb toward the ceiling. "They come down here, get drunk on company cards, and treat us like furniture. Just ignore them, get the tip, and get out. Flora nodded, gripping her tray. Got it. The irony was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. The offices upstairs were leased by Bennett Holdings. Technically, those wolves were her tenants. Heads up, David whispered, rushing past them, his face pale. We have a VIP walk-in. Table 1, the window seat. Who is it? Chloe asked. Arthur Pendleton, David hissed, looking terrified. CEO of Pendleton Capital. He's in a mood. Flora, you take him. Chloe, you're in the weeds with the private party in the back. Chloe gave Flora a sympathetic look. Good luck. Pendleton is a nightmare. He made the last girl cry because the ice in his scotch wasn't cubed enough. Flora tightened her apron strings. Arthur Pendleton. She knew the name. He ran a mid-sized equity firm on the 30th floor. They had been negotiating his lease renewal for months. His lawyers were aggressive, demanding rent reductions while he posted record profits. She had never met him in person. Her legal team handled the sharks, but she had seen his file. He was currently 3 months behind on his rent, claiming cash flow restructuring. Yet here he was, walking into a $4 sign restaurant without a reservation. I got this, she said, her voice dropping an octave. She walked out onto the floor. Table 1 was the prime spot. It overlooked the rainy streets of Chicago, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red against the glass. Sitting there was a man who looked exactly like his reputation. Arthur Pendleton was perhaps 45, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than a Honda Civic. He had slicked back hair, a jawline that looked surgically enhanced, and eyes that scanned the room with bored disdain. With him was a woman much younger, perhaps 25. She looked uncomfortable, clutching a designer bag like a shield. Flora took a breath, put on her best customer service smile, and approached the table. Good evening, she said warmly. Welcome to the Gilded Fork. My name is Flora, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Arthur didn't look up. He was busy scrolling on his phone. The silence stretched for 5 awkward seconds. The woman looked at Flora apologetically. Arthur, she whispered. He held up a finger to silence her, typed out a final message, and then slowly placed the phone on the table, face down. He finally looked at Flora. His eyes were cold, assessing her not as a human being, but as a utility. Sparkling water, he said. San Pellegrino, not Perrier. And bring the wine list, the reserve list, not the house list. Of course, Flora said. And for you, miss, just still water, please, she said softly. I'll be right back. As Flora turned to leave, she heard him mutter to his date loud enough for her to hear. They hire anyone these days. Look at those shoes. Tacky. She paused for a microsecond. Her shoes were orthopedic non-slips from Walmart because she wanted to blend in. She felt a spark of irritation in her chest, hot and sharp. She swallowed it down. The customer is always right, she told herself, even when he's a tenant who owes you $250,000 in back rent. She walked to the bar, her hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the hunt. She had come here to inspect the restaurant. But now she was inspecting Arthur Pendleton. Flora returned with the water and the leather-bound reserve wine list. She poured the San Pellegrino, carefully ensuring not a drop hit the pristine tablecloth. Arthur watched her hands like a hawk, waiting for a field mouse to make a mistake. The wine list, sir, she said, presenting it with 2 hands. He snatched it from her without a word. He flipped through the pages, aggressively, sighing loudly, as if the selection was a personal insult to his lineage. This list is dated, he announced to the room. Do you have the 15 Chateau Margaux? I believe we do, sir, she replied. She knew the inventory. Her father had curated the cellar personally before he died. It's an excellent vintage. Don't tell me what kind of vintage it is, he snapped, closing the book. I know wine. You just fetch it, and make sure you decant it properly. I don't want sediment in my glass, because you were rushing. Arthur, please. The woman whispered, her face flushing pink. It's fine. It is not fine, Jessica, he said, ignoring her discomfort. I am paying for excellence. I expect excellence. If I wanted mediocrity, I would have taken you to Olive Garden. Flora kept her face perfectly neutral, a mask of servitude. I will bring the sommelier to open the bottle, sir. No. He waved a hand dismissively. The sommelier here is an idiot. I remember him from last time. You do it, and don't mess it up. She nodded. Very well. She went to the cellar. David was back there, pacing. He ordered the Margot, David asked, eyes wide. That's a $1,200 bottle. Flora, are you sure you want to open that? If the cork breaks. I can handle a corkscrew, David, she said calmly. He insisted I do it. She took the dusty bottle from the rack. It was heavy, cool to the touch. She grabbed the crystal decanter and a candle. When she returned to the table, Arthur was in the middle of a story. So I told the board, if you want to play hardball, I'll just buy the building. I'll buy the whole damn block. Flora almost laughed out loud. He couldn't even pay his rent yet. He was bragging about buying the building. The Bennett Tower was valued at $400 million. Arthur Pendleton didn't have the liquidity to buy the lobby, let alone the building. She set the tray down. The Chateau Margaux, sir. She presented the label. He glanced at it and gave a curt nod. She cut the foil. She inserted the worm of the corkscrew. She worked with the precision of a surgeon. She had watched her father do this 1,000 times. Gentle pressure, consistent torque. Don't disturb the sediment. The cork came out with a soft, satisfying pop. She poured a taste into his glass. He swirled it, held it up to the light, and took a sip. He pursed his lips, swishing the liquid around his mouth for an uncomfortable amount of time. It's tight, he declared. Needs to breathe for at least 30 minutes. Decant it. Leave it. Of course. Flora poured the wine into the decanter, the dark red liquid cascading against the glass. So, Arthur said, turning his attention to her as she poured. How long have you been doing this? It was the first time he had asked her a direct question, but the tone wasn't friendly. It was predatory. I've been here a few weeks, she lied. It shows, he sneered. You're stiff. Nervous. You know, in my business, if someone is nervous, it means they're hiding incompetence. I'm just trying to ensure everything is perfect for you, sir. What's your name again? Flora. Well, Flora. He said her name like it was a disease. Let me give you a piece of advice. People like me, we can smell fear, and we can smell cheap perfume. You have both. Her hand froze for a fraction of a second. The perfume she was wearing was Joe Malone, and it cost more than his tie. But she remembered the role. She was the struggling waitress. I'll try to do better, she said softly. See that you do. We're ready to order. He ordered the lobster thermidor. Jessica ordered the roasted chicken. The next hour was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Arthur complained about everything. The bread was too cold. The music was too loud. The air conditioning was too drafty. Every time Flora walked past the table, he would snap his fingers, snap, snap, to summon her for trivial things. A new napkin. More ice. He's a monster, Chloe whispered to Flora as they passed in the kitchen. I saw him make a gesture at your, behind your back. I saw it too, Flora said, her jaw tightening. By the time the check came, Flora was physically trembling. Not from fear, but from the sheer effort of suppressing her rage. She wanted to tell him who she was. She wanted to tell him that his lease renewal was sitting on her desk awaiting her signature. She wanted to tell him that she could lock him out of his office by Monday morning. But not yet. The trap wasn't fully set. She dropped the leather folder containing the bill on the table. "Whenever you're ready, sir." Arthur didn't even look at the total. He threw a platinum credit card onto the table. It made a sharp clack. "Run it," he said. Flora processed the payment. The bill came to $1,450.50. She brought the receipt back for him to sign. This was the moment of truth. The tip. In the service industry, the tip is the verdict. It's the final judgment. Arthur took the pen. He scribbled his signature with a flourish. Then he paused at the tip line. He looked up at Flora, a smirk playing on his lips. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. He placed the bill on top of the signed receipt. "Cash," he said loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Keep the change." On a $1,400 bill, $5. That was a 0.3% tip. The restaurant went silent for a moment. Even Jessica looked horrified. "Arthur, you can't—" "Hush," he snapped at her. Then he looked at Flora. "Service was adequate, Flora, but you lack spark. Maybe this will motivate you to find a profession you're actually good at." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Come on, Jessica." Flora stood there, staring at the crumpled bill. Lincoln's face looked up at her, mocking. This was it. This was the breaking point. "Sir," she called out. Her voice wasn't the soft, subservient voice of the waitress anymore. It was the voice of Flora Bennett, owner of the Bennett Tower. Arthur stopped and turned around, looking annoyed. "What is it not enough? You should be grateful for anything you get." "You forgot something," she said, picking up the $5 bill. She walked around the table, closing the distance between them. The dining room was watching. David was freezing by the hostess stand, his eyes bulging. "I don't need your charity, Arthur," she said, using his first name without the sir. "But I think you're going to need this $5 more than I do." Arthur laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Excuse me, do you know who I am?" She smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Arthur Pendleton. You're the tenant in Suite 3004, the one who is 3 months behind on rent, the one whose company Pendleton Capital is currently under investigation by the SEC for inflating assets, and the one who just insulted the woman who owns the roof over his head." The silence in the restaurant was absolute. The only sound was the rain hammering against the glass. Arthur's face went from amusement to confusion. "What are you talking about? Who is the manager, David? Get over here and fire this delusional girl." David walked over, but he didn't look at Flora. He looked at the floor. "I can't fire her, Mr. Pendleton," David said quietly. "Why the hell not?" Arthur screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. "Because," Flora answered for him, stepping closer so she was toe-to-toe with Arthur. "Because I don't work for David. David works for me." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out not a notepad but a heavy brass key card, the master key to the building, the one with the Bennett family crest embossed on it. "I'm Flora Bennett," she said, "and we need to talk about your lease." The silence in the Gilded Fork was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a physical weight pressing down on the white tablecloths and the crystal glasses. Every diner, every busboy, and every line cook who had peeked out from the kitchen was fixated on table 1. Arthur Pendleton blinked. The red blotches on his neck seemed to pulse in time, with the vein throbbing in his forehead. He looked at the heavy brass keycard in Flora's hand, then back at her face, and then at her cheap shoes. His brain was trying to reconcile two impossible realities: the servant he had just abused and the landlord he feared. "You're lying," Arthur scoffed, though the confidence in his voice was cracking like thin ice. Elias Bennett didn't have a daughter. He had a son, or a nephew. Someone in New York. "My father had one child, Arthur," Flora said, her voice steady and cold. "He kept me out of the spotlight because he knew that in this city, anonymity is the only luxury money can't buy. But he taught me everything, including how to spot a tenant who is leveraging debt to maintain a facade of wealth." Arthur turned sharply to David. "Manager, are you going to let her speak to me like this? I'll have your job. I'll sue this place into the ground." David, who had spent the last 5 years terrified of men like Arthur, finally straightened his spine. He took a slow step forward, crossing his hands behind his back. "Mr. Pendleton," David said, his voice surprisingly deep, "Mrs. Bennett is the sole owner of the Bennett Tower and the majority shareholder of the hospitality group that operates this restaurant. If she says she is Flora Bennett, then she is Flora Bennett. And if she says we need to talk about your lease, I suggest you listen." Arthur's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish pulled onto a dock, gasping, desperate, and out of his element. The woman Jessica slowly set her glass of water down. The condensation pooled on the wood. She looked at Arthur with a mixture of horror and realization. The veil had been lifted. She wasn't dining with a titan of industry. She was dining with a bully who was broke. "Arthur," Jessica said, her voice cutting through the tension, "you told me you owned this building." Arthur whipped his head around. "Jessica, shut up." "Not now." "No." She stood up, grabbing her clutch. "You told me you owned the tower. You told me the waitstaff knew you personally because you were their boss. You lied." It's a misunderstanding," Arthur stammered, his hands fluttering. "She's playing a prank. It's a skit for social media." He looked at Flora, a desperate, manic grin stretching his face. "Right, where's the camera? Very funny, sweetheart. You got me." Flora didn't smile. She didn't blink. She just looked at him, with the same bored disdain he had shown her 10 minutes ago. "This isn't a skit, Arthur. This is an eviction notice." She placed the $5 bill back into his breast pocket. She patted it flat against his chest. He flinched as if she had burned him. "You have until Monday morning to clear your personal effects from Suite 3004, she said. "My legal team will be in touch regarding the arrears. And the breach of contract." "Breach of contract?" Arthur hissed, his eyes narrowing. "Being late on rent isn't a breach if I pay the late fees. I have rights. You can't just kick me out." "It's not the rent, Arthur." She leaned in, close whispering, so only he could hear. "It's the subletting. We know you've been renting out the server room to that crypto mining startup off the books to cover your cash flow problems. That's a violation of the fire code, the electrical code, and Section 8, Paragraph 4 of your lease." His face drained of all color. He went from red to a sickly pale gray. He knew she knew. He choked. "Get out," she said, stepping back. "And take your $5. You're going to need it for the subway. I'm revoking your parking validation." Arthur looked around the room. He saw the smirks on the faces of the other diners. He saw the waiters he had tormented, openly staring at him with vindictive joy. His empire of illusion had crumbled in 3 minutes. He grabbed his jacket, not bothering to button it. He didn't look at Jessica. He didn't look at Flora. He stormed toward the exit, his expensive loafers clapping loudly against the marble floor, a sound that used to signal power, but now just sounded like a retreat. As the revolving door spun him out into the rainy Chicago night, the restaurant remained silent for one heartbeat more. Then someone at table 8, a regular and old lawyer named Mr. Henderson, started to clap. Slowly at first. Clap, clap, clap. Then the couple at table 6 joined in. Then the bar. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was applauding. It wasn't a polite golf clap. It was a raucous, cathartic ovation. Flora felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Chloe. She was beaming, tears actually welling in her eyes. "That," she shouted over the applause, "was the greatest thing I have ever seen in my life. Please tell me you're actually rich and not just a really good actress." Flora untied her apron. She felt the weight of the night, the sore feet, the sweat, the humiliation lift off her shoulders. She looked at Chloe and smiled a real, genuine smile this time. "I'm rich, Chloe," she said, "and you're getting a raise." Monday mornings in the Loop are usually a symphony of grey suits and urgency. From the 41st floor of the Bennett Tower, the people down on the sidewalk looked like ants navigating a concrete grid. Flora stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office looking down. She wasn't wearing the stained apron anymore. She was wearing a tailored navy blazer, cream silk trousers, and heels that actually fit her arches. Her hair was blown out, sleek and professional. Behind her, the heavy oak door creaked open. "Ms. Bennett." It was George Abernathy, her family's attorney for the last 20 years. George was a man of few words and many billable hours. He held a thick file under his arm. "Come in, George." She turned away from the window. "Do we have the papers?" George sat at the conference table, spreading out documents with methodical precision. "We do." The eviction notice was served at 8:00 a.m. The locks on suite 3004 were changed at 8:15 a.m. by security. "But we have a situation." "What kind of situation?" She sat opposite him, pouring herself a black coffee from the silver carafe. "Arthur Pendleton is in the lobby," George said, adjusting his glasses. "He's been there since 7:30. He's demanding to see you. He's making quite a scene. He's telling anyone who will listen that there has been a clerical error, and that he's a personal friend of Elias Bennett." Flora took a sip of coffee. "Let him wait. He's threatening to call the press," George noted dryly. "He says he's going to spin this as a hostile takeover of a struggling, minority-owned business. He's trying to play the victim card." Flora laughed. "Pendleton Capital is about as struggling, minority-owned as a yacht club. He's a third-generation trust fund baby who gambled away his inheritance on bad tech stocks. Did we get the forensic accounting report?" George tapped a specific folder. "We did. It's worse than we thought, Flora. He's not just behind on rent. He's leveraged the company assets to cover personal gambling debts in Vegas. He owes the Venetian $3 million. He owes the IRS $2 million. And—" George paused, looking uncomfortable. And he's raided his employees' pension fund." The air in the room went cold. Flora felt a knot of anger tighten in her stomach. It was one thing to be rude to a waitress. It was one thing to be bad with money. But to steal from the people who worked for you, that was a sin her father never forgave, and neither would she. "He stole their retirement," she asked, her voice low. "He borrowed it," George corrected using air quotes, "to cover the margin calls. He likely intended to pay it back if the market turned, but the market didn't turn. If we evict him and bankrupt the company, those 25 employees downstairs don't just lose their jobs, they lose their savings." She stood up and walked back to the window. She thought about Chloe working 2 jobs to pay for law school. She thought about the servers at the Gilded Fork. Then she thought about the secretaries and analysts working for Pendleton Capital on the 30th floor. They were likely just like Chloe, trying to survive, unaware that their captain had already steered the ship into an iceberg while sipping vintage wine. If she destroyed Arthur today, she would be destroying them too. "We can't just let him walk away," she said. "If we press criminal charges, the SEC freezes the assets," George explained. "The employees will be last in line for restitution. They'll get pennies on the dollar in 5 years." She watched a pigeon land on the ledge outside the window. It pecked at the glass, confused by the reflection. "I want to see him," she said suddenly. George frowned. "I advise against it. He's volatile." "I want him up here, George. Now. Send security to escort him, and George, leave the file open on the desk." George nodded, slowly picked up the office phone, and dialed security. "Send Pendleton up. Escort him. Do not let him go to the bathroom. Do not let him make a call. Straight to the boardroom." 10 minutes later, the double doors opened. Arthur Pendleton looked like a man who hadn't slept in 48 hours. He was wearing the same suit from Friday night, but it was rumpled. His tie was loose. He hadn't shaved, and the stubble on his jaw was grey and patchy. 2 large security guards stood behind him. Arthur saw her and stopped. He looked at the office, the expansive views, the modern art, the mahogany desk. Then he looked at her, the waitress. Flora. He breathed out, trying to summon a charm that had long since rotted. "Miss Bennet." "Look, Friday night. I was under a lot of stress. The market, you know, it does things to a man. I had too much to drink. I apologize. Sincerely." He walked toward the desk, hand extended. "I'm sure we can work this out. Business to business, one CEO to another." She didn't shake his hand. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit down, Arthur." He sat nervously smoothing his tie. "Look about the rent. I have a liquidity event coming up next week. I can write you a check for the full amount, plus interest. Double interest, just. I need access to my servers. I have trades queued up." "There is no liquidity event, Arthur," she said, glancing down at the open file. "Unless you count your ex-wife selling your Hamptons house as a liquidity event. But that money goes to her, not you." Arthur froze. "How do you—" "I know about the gambling debts," she interrupted. "I know about the subletting, and I know about the pension fund." Arthur slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him. He looked small. "I was going to put it back," he whispered. "I just needed one big win." "You don't have any wins left," she said. "You're done. I can pick up this phone and call the SEC right now. You'll be in handcuffs before lunch. You'll go to federal prison for embezzlement." Arthur began to weep. It was a pathetic sniveling sound. "Please. I have kids. Don't send me to jail. I'll do anything. I'll declare bankruptcy. Just don't call the feds." She watched him cry. She felt no pity, but she felt a responsibility. Not to him, but to the people he had hurt. "I have a proposal," she said. Arthur looked up, tears streaking his face. "Anything. I won't call the SEC today," she said, "and I won't evict your company immediately. Thank you, oh God, thank you." "Shut up and listen," she snapped. "Here are my terms. You are going to resign as CEO of Pendleton Capital, effective immediately. You will sign over your voting rights and your equity to a trustee of my choosing." "What, that's my company?" "Not anymore. It's the only asset you have left to pay back what you stole," she said. "Second, you are going to liquidate your personal assets. The cars, the watch, the boat. All of it goes back into the employee pension fund." "But I'll be destitute," he stammered. "You'll be broke," she corrected, "like a waitress on a Friday night, but you won't be in prison." He stared at her, his eyes wide. He realized he was trapped. "And one last thing. She added a small, dangerous smile returning to her face. "What?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You like the restaurant industry, don't you, Arthur? You have such strong opinions on service." I suppose. "Good, because part of your restitution involves community service, and I have just the place for you to work off your debt to society." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It wasn't a legal document. It was an employment application for the Gilded Fork. "We're short a dishwasher," she said. "Start tomorrow. Minimum wage. And Arthur, if I see a single spot on the plates, I'm calling the FBI. The kitchen of the Gilded Fork at 7 p.m. on a Friday is not a place for the weak. It is a humid, deafening box of controlled chaos. The air is thick with the smell of searing grease garlic and the sharp tang of sanitizer." Arthur Pendleton stood in front of the 3-compartment sink, staring at a mountain of dirty plates that seemed to regenerate like the heads of a hydra. He was no longer wearing his $3,000 charcoal suit. He was wearing a white chef's coat that was 2 sizes too big and a rubber apron that went down to his ankles. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms that were already pink from the scalding water. "Hey, new guy!" shouted Manuel, the sous chef. "We need soup bowls. Table 12 is waiting." Arthur flinched. "I'm scrubbing as fast as I can." "Scrub faster," Manuel barked, slamming a tray of greasy pans onto the metal counter, next to Arthur, sending a spray of grey water onto Arthur's face. Arthur wiped his face with a wet forearm, suppressing the urge to scream. 3 days ago, he had been the master of the universe. He had commanded boardrooms. He had fired people for looking at him the wrong way. Now he was being yelled at by a 20-year-old culinary student named Manuel because he wasn't scrubbing dried bisque fast enough. Flora watched him from the manager's office, looking through the one-way glass that overlooked the kitchen. Beside her stood David, who looked like a man who had won the lottery. "He's actually doing it," David whispered, watching Arthur struggle with a pot crusted with burnt risotto. "I never thought he'd show up." "He didn't have a choice," Flora said, crossing her arms. "It was this or federal prison." His lawyers explained the reality to him. If he completes 6 months of community restitution here and his assets cover the pension hole, I agree to sign a non-prosecution waiver. "It's poetic," David said. "But Flora, is he actually going to fix the money problem?" The staff upstairs, they're panicked. Her expression darkened. She turned away from the glass. "That's my job now. Keep an eye on him, David. If he tries to sneak out for a smoke break, add an hour to his shift." She left the restaurant and took the private elevator up to the 30th floor. The offices of Pendleton Capital were silent. It was a ghost town. The sleek glass cubicles were empty, computers dark. The only sign of life was in the conference room, where 25 terrified employees were waiting for her. She walked in. The tension was palpable. These weren't rich bankers. They were analysts, secretaries, IT guys, regular people with families. They looked at her with a mixture of hope and fear. "Good morning," she said, placing her tablet on the table. "My name is Flora Bennett. As of yesterday, Bennett Holdings has assumed administrative control of this firm via a receivership agreement." A woman in the front row raised her hand. Her name was Linda, the office manager. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. "Ms. Bennett," her voice shook. "Is it true? Is the pension fund gone? I have 20 years in that fund. My husband is sick. I can't lose that money." The room went deadly quiet. Flora looked Linda in the eye. This was the burden of leadership her father had warned her about. It wasn't about counting money. It was about carrying the weight of other people's livelihoods. Arthur Pendleton treated this company like his personal piggy bank. She began, her voice clear and firm. He drained the accounts. The fund is currently empty. A collective gasp went through the room. Someone started sobbing in the back. However, she raised her voice, cutting through the panic. I am not Arthur Pendleton. Bennett Holdings is freezing Arthur's personal assets. We are seizing his homes, his cars, his art collection, and his offshore accounts. We estimate this will recover about 60% of the funds. What about the other 40%? A young man asked aggressively. That's still millions missing. I will cover the difference, she said. The room froze. Excuse me, Linda asked. I am personally capitalizing the fund to make it whole, she said. It will cost me a significant amount of liquidity, but I will not allow a tenant in my building to rob honest workers. Your pensions are safe. Your jobs, however, are going to change. We are restructuring. But no one loses their retirement today. For a second, nobody moved. Then Linda stood up, walked over to her, and hugged her. It was awkward, unprofessional, and completely necessary. She wept into Flora's blazer. Thank you, she choked out. Thank you. Flora patted her back, feeling a lump in her throat. This was worth more than any rent check. But as the meeting dispersed and the relief washed over the room, her phone buzzed. It was George, her lawyer. Text Flora. You need to come to the 40th floor immediately. The forensic accountant found something. It's not just gambling debts. It's much worse. She left the smiling employees and ran to the elevator. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She thought she had solved it. She thought Arthur was just a greedy, incompetent gambler. She was wrong. When Flora walked into her office, George was standing over a pile of documents, his face pale. Beside him was Marcus, their lead forensic accountant, a man who could find a missing penny in a billion-dollar budget. Tell me, she said, closing the door. We traced the wire transfers, Marcus said, without preamble. Arthur didn't lose the $3 million in Vegas. I mean, he lost some money there. But the bulk of the missing cash wasn't lost. It was paid. Paid to whom? She asked. To a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Obsidian Ventures, Marcus said. He was sending them monthly payments of $50,000 for the last 2 years. Then last month, a lump sum of $2 million. Blackmail, she guessed. That's what it looks like, George said. But look who owns the shell company. George slid a piece of paper across the mahogany desk. It was a corporate registry printout, obtained through some likely grey area legal maneuvering. The beneficial owner of Obsidian Ventures wasn't a drug dealer or a mobster. It was Victor Sterling. The name hit Flora like a physical blow. Victor Sterling was the CEO of Sterling Development, her father's fiercest rival. For 30 years, Sterling had tried to buy the Bennett Tower. He had tried to zone them out, sue them, and bury them. Her father had beaten him every time. Sterling, she whispered. Why is Arthur paying Victor Sterling? Keep reading, Marcus said, pointing to a clause in the building's original mortgage documents, a dusty file from the 1990s. The Bennett Tower's primary mortgage has a high-risk tenancy clause, Marcus explained. If the building's aggregate tenant credit rating drops below a B average for 3 consecutive months, the bank can call the loan immediately. They can force a foreclosure. She stared at him. And Arthur Pendleton was our anchor tenant. He occupied 4 floors. Exactly, George said, his voice grim. Sterling wasn't blackmailing Arthur for money. He was funding him, then squeezing him. He forced Arthur to take on bad debt, to ruin his own credit rating and to cook the books. Sterling used Arthur as a biological weapon to infect the building's financial health. He's trying to trigger a foreclosure. Flora realized the horror dawning on her. If the bank calls the loan, we'd have to pay $400 million in 30 days. We don't have that much cash on hand. We'd have to sell, and Sterling would be there to buy it for pennies on the dollar. It's a hostile takeover from the inside out, George confirmed, and Arthur is the key. Flora felt a cold rage settle over her. This wasn't just business, this was war, and Arthur Pendleton wasn't just a jerk, he was a traitor. "Where is he?" she asked. "Arthur, he's in the dish pit," George said. "Get him," she said. "Bring him up here, now." 20 minutes later, the security guards dragged Arthur into her office. He smelled of old food and sweat. He looked exhausted, his hands trembling. He saw the papers on her desk. He saw the name Victor Sterling, highlighted in neon yellow. Arthur stopped fighting the guards. He sagged. "You found it." "Get out," Flora told the guards and the lawyers. "Leave us." They hesitated, but she nodded. They filed out, leaving her alone with the dishwasher, who used to be a CEO. "You sold us out," she said quietly. "My father treated you with respect. He gave you that lease when no one else would. And you sold the Bennett Tower to Victor Sterling." Arthur collapsed into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't have a choice, Flora. You don't understand. Sterling, he knew about the embezzlement years ago. He found out before you did. He came to me. He said I could either go to jail then, or I could do what he asked. So you decided to destroy my family's legacy to save your own skin," she spat. "He threatened my kids." "Flora," Arthur looked up, his eyes wild. "He said he'd plant evidence. He owns judges. You know how powerful Sterling is. He wanted the tower. He said all I had to do was tank my credit rating and create a financial toxicity event. He promised to bail me out once he bought the building. And you believed him." "I was desperate," Arthur cried. "And then, when I couldn't pay the rent, and you showed up, I knew it was over. That night at the restaurant, I was trying to get evicted. I wanted out. I couldn't take the pressure anymore." She looked at him. A pathetic, broken man. But as much as she hated him, she realized something. He was the only weapon she had. Sterling thought Arthur was done. Sterling thought the plan was moving forward. Sterling didn't know that she knew. She walked over to the window, looking out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, in a penthouse across the river, Victor Sterling was probably toasting to his victory. "Arthur," she said, not turning around. "Yes," he whispered. "You want redemption. You want to stay out of prison. Yes. God, yes." She turned to face him. "Then you're going to help me destroy Victor Sterling." Arthur blinked. "How he's untouchable." "Nobody is untouchable," she said. "He thinks you're his puppet, so you're going to keep playing the puppet. You're going to call him. You're going to tell him that the plan is working. You're going to tell him that I'm panicking, that I'm looking to sell. You want me to lie to him. I want you to set a trap," she said, walking back to the desk. "We're going to invite Sterling to a meeting, a secret meeting. You're going to tell him that I'm desperate to offload the building before the bank forecloses. You're going to tell him I'm willing to sell the Bennett Tower for half its value just to walk away." "He'll never believe it," Arthur said. "He knows you're Elias Bennett's daughter. He knows you're a fighter." "He knows I'm a waitress," she corrected him. "He knows I was working the floor of a restaurant. He thinks I'm weak. He thinks I'm incompetent. He thinks I'm nothing like my father." She leaned over the desk, her eyes locking with Arthur's. "We're going to use his arrogance against him. You're going to set up the meeting for tomorrow night. Here, in the penthouse suite." "And then what?" Arthur asked. "And then?" She smiled a smile that had no warmth in it. I'm going to serve him the most expensive dinner of his life." Arthur looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see a waitress, and he didn't see a landlord. He saw a shark. "Okay," Arthur said, straightening up. "I'll make the call." "Good," she said. "Now go wash your hands. You have a shift to finish in the kitchen before you make that call. I want Sterling to hear the background noise. I want him to think you're at rock bottom." Arthur nodded. He stood up, looking strangely dignified in his dirty chef's coat. "Flora," he said at the door. "What?" "Your father. He would have been terrifyingly proud of you right now." He closed the door. She picked up the phone and dialed George. "Get the legal team ready, and get the recording equipment. We're going hunting." The penthouse of the Bennett Tower was a glass fortress floating in the clouds, usually a symbol of untouchable power. Tonight, however, Flora had staged it to look like a surrender. Cardboard boxes were scattered haphazardly across the marble floors. She wore a simple, slightly wrinkled grey dress, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She paced the room, wringing her hands, looking every bit the overwhelmed heiress, crumbling under the weight of a legacy she couldn't handle. At 8 o'clock, p.m. sharp, the private elevator chimed. Arthur Pendleton stepped out first. He looked genuinely nauseous, his skin clammy. Behind him walked Victor Sterling. Sterling was a man carved from granite and arrogance. He was 60 with a tan that spoke of winters in St. Bart's and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He walked into Flora's home, not as a guest, but as a conqueror, surveying captured territory. "Miss Bennett," Sterling said, his voice a smooth, patronizing baritone. He didn't offer his hand. "Arthur tells me you're in a bit of a bind." "Mr. Sterling," Flora said, forcing a tremor into her voice. "Thank you for coming. I didn't know who else to call. The bank is calling the loan on Monday." Sterling chuckled, walking over to the window to look at the view. Her view. "Well, your father and I were competitors, Flora. But I always respected Elias. It would be a tragedy to see his legacy seized by the bank. Foreclosure is such an ugly word. It sticks to a family name like Tar." He turned to look at her, his eyes gleaming with predatory amusement. "Arthur tells me the tenants are revolting. Cash flow is negative. You're underwater." "It's been hard," she whispered, looking at the floor. "I wasn't ready for this. I was working as a waitress. I don't know how to run an empire." "Exactly," Sterling said, stepping closer. "You're a server, Flora, and there is no shame in that. Some people are born to serve, and some are born to lead. Your father was a leader. You have other talents, I'm sure." Arthur stood by the door, silent. Flora saw him wince at the insult, but he held his ground. "I just want out," she said. "Arthur said you could make the bank go away." "I'm a generous man," Sterling said. He reached into his Italian wool jacket and pulled out a thick contract. "I am prepared to take this burden off your shoulders. I will buy the Bennett Tower for $200 million. She gasped, feigning shock. "But it was appraised at $400 million last year." "That was before your anchor tenant Pendleton Capital became toxic," Sterling said, gesturing dismissively to Arthur. "That was before the financial irregularities. The market is spooked, Flora. $200 million is a gift. Take it, pay off the debts, and go live a quiet life. Open a little cafe." She looked at the contract sitting on the coffee table. This was the moment. Why did Arthur have to ruin everything? She asked, turning to Arthur. "I didn't want to." Arthur burst out, his voice cracking perfectly. "I told her, Victor. I told her I had no choice." Sterling sighed, annoyed. "Arthur, compose yourself." "But she asked about Obsidian Ventures." Arthur said, rapidly delivering the trigger line. She asked about the payments. She saw the bank statements. The room went dead silent. Sterling froze. He turned slowly to look at Arthur, then back to Flora. "What do you know about Obsidian Ventures?" Sterling asked, his voice dropping an octave. Flora stayed in character, looking confused. "Arthur was paying millions to them. He said you made him do it. He said you forced him to destroy his credit rating so the bank would call my loan. Is that true?" Sterling laughed. It was a cold, arrogant sound. He thought she was just a confused girl repeating things she didn't understand. Flora. Sterling shook his head. "It's called corporate leverage. Arthur was a pawn, a necessary sacrifice to bring the price of this building down to a number I liked. I incentivized him to crash the building's credit rating so I could buy it cheap. It's just business. Elias would have done the same." "So you admit it?" she asked, looking him in the eye. "You blackmailed Arthur to sabotage my company." "I admit that I won," Sterling said, checking his watch. "Sign the paper, Flora, or lose it all for nothing." She stared at the contract. Then she stood up. She walked over to the table, picked up the expensive fountain pen, and snapped it in half. Crack! The sound echoed in the quiet room. She dropped the broken pieces on the floor. She straightened her posture, rolling her shoulders back. She wiped the fake worry from her face and replaced it with a shark-like grin. "You're right, Victor," she said, her voice changing, completely strong, commanding, and laced with iron. My father would have appreciated the strategy, but he would have never been sloppy enough to confess to racketeering in a room wired for sound. Sterling's face fell. "Excuse me." She picked up a remote and pressed a button. The large television screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed a live feed of the room, and in the corner, a red light blinked. Recording secured. "Obsidian Ventures isn't just a shell company, Victor," she said, stepping toward him. "My forensic team traced the IP addresses. You manage it from your personal server. That's wire fraud extortion and market manipulation." The elevator doors opened behind him. George, her lawyer, walked in, flanked by 2 FBI agents. "Victor Sterling," the lead agent announced. "We have a warrant for your arrest." Sterling looked around, trapped. The arrogance evaporated, leaving just a scared old man. "This is a mistake, Flora. You can't do this. We're peers." "We aren't peers, Victor," she said coldly. "You're a criminal. I'm a waitress." As they handcuffed Sterling and marched him out, screaming threats, Flora turned to Arthur. He was slumped against the wall, looking like he might faint from relief. "Is it over?" he whispered. "For him?" "Yes," she said. "He'll spend the rest of his life fighting federal charges." "Thank you, Flora," Arthur said, tears in his eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," she replied, pouring herself a glass of champagne. "You have a shift in 20 minutes. Arthur blinked. "What?" "You helped me catch the shark so you won't go to jail," she said, taking a sip. "But you still stole from your employees. You still treated my staff like dirt. You have 6 months of dishes to scrub. Don't be late." Arthur looked at her stunned. Then a small, genuine smile appeared on his face. "Yes, Mom. I'll see you downstairs." He buttoned his jacket and left. Flora walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. She wasn't just Flora Bennett, the mogul, and she wasn't just Flora, the waitress. She was both, and she had a dinner rush to catch. What a ride Flora Bennett went from serving appetizers to serving justice, proving that you should never underestimate someone just because of the uniform they wear. Arthur learned the hard way that the struggling waitress held the keys to his entire world, and Victor Sterling found out that true power isn't about bullying, it's about integrity. The biggest takeaway here: treat everyone with respect, whether they're the CEO or the person cleaning the dishes. You never know who you're really talking to, and you never know when the tables might turn. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and high-stakes drama, please smash that. Button it really helps the channel grow. And if you want to see more stories like this, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. What would you have done if you were Flora? Would you have forgiven Arthur? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.